Okay, welcome back to video 11. This is part 2, experimenting with mouse controls. And this video is going to have to do with detecting mouse clicks using a function. So in the part 1 we experimented with how to read whether or not a button was being pushed or not. And that's not really the same as what we call a click in Windows. And let me show you what I'm talking about. If we consider like Windows Explorer, for example, where did it go? I open up Windows Explorer and I right-click on a file and I choose to delete. I get this dialog box with a yes/no button. Now, if you've ever paid attention, if I go down and hover over no, it turns blue. If I click it and hold the button, nothing happens. If I move away and let go of the button, nothing happens. So that didn't count as a click. Even though the mouse was right over that button when I pushed down on it, that did not get considered to be a click. So I had the opportunity to change my mind. I could click it and go, nope, I changed my mind, let go of it. Or more importantly, if I said yes, delete it, and then said wait, nope, then I just move away and let go. It doesn't take it. And it doesn't just matter where you let go. So if I clicked here off the button and then held it down while I moved on top of it and let go, it doesn't work either. So both the down click and the up click, or the letting up of the button, need to happen on the same control in order for it to take effect. So that's something that you kind of take for granted when you use Windows, but if you really think about it, it's more complicated than you'd think. No. So how can we accomplish that in this program? And I'm going to start with what we did in part 1, where we tested these controls. A lot of this we don't have to use, but it's already here, so I'll just leave it. My plan is to create a function that will be used to tell us whether or not a single click or double click has occurred on a particular button. And it's going to be relative to the character position on the screen. So instead of having an OK button or a cancel button, I just want it to tell me if somebody double clicks on this point in the screen, like that, I want to know what character position that is, the row and the column of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want my function to update these variables so that I don't have to calculate mouse col X and row Y explicitly out here in the program. I want the function to do this and update these for me. So I'm just going to make these shared so that the function can see and change these values. Okay. And now I want to create a function that's going to be called mouse clicks. So let's go down to the bottom of the program, and I'm going to start a section for subroutines and functions. I like doing a big banner like this because when you're scrolling through the program, it's kind of easy to see it come by. And then he's like, okay, here's where they are. And now here is the beginning of our function. So now we have a function called mouse clicks that will receive one parameter called button that's an integer. And that'll tell us which button we want to know about, 1, 2, or 3. My comment says returns the number of valid clicks of the given mouse button. Also updates the shared mouse character positions. So what I want to do is say, I can say mouse clicks parentheses 1 for the left button, and then the answer coming back from this function will either be 0 if it's not been clicked, or 1 if it's been clicked once, that would be a single click, or 2 if it's been clicked twice within the past half of a second. So let's see what we have to do to make that work. There's a new concept to talk about that we haven't talked about before in any lesson, and it's something called static variables. I think I've used the word before, but I haven't actually talked about using the static command. In a function or a subroutine, when you make a local variable, that variable has always been dynamic, which means that it's only used within this function call. And as soon as the function is done running, that variable is thrown away and it loses its value. Well, we can declare variables in our function that's static, and that means that it'll hold its value each time the function is run. So you run the function the first time and it sets a variable to the value 19, and then the function ends, and then maybe 2 minutes later the program calls the same function again with different values. Well, that variable that you defined the first time is still going to have 19 in it, so you can refer back to what was in there the prior time that the function ran. So I'm going to need a few of those kinds of variables, because in order to detect a double click, for example, I need to know what happened the last time you checked, the last time a button was clicked. Is it the same position? Is it a different position? How long has it been since the last click occurred? If it was more than a half a second ago, then that's not a double click, for example. So here are the static variables that I'm going to need. So click timer, which will represent the timer value of the prior, or actually of this click, this button push. Last button will be what was the last button that I looked at in the prior click. Was it 1, 2, or 3? And then the last call X and the last row Y. So what position was it in? What character position? Not the pixel position, but the character position was it in the last time that this button was clicked, assuming it was the same button. I'm also going to need some regular dynamic variables that are only used within this function call. They don't need to be saved between calls. So I'll just use a dim for those, and that's clicks, which would be the number of clicks, 1, 2, or 0, 1, or 2. Up timer will be the timer value associated with when the button is released or let go of. And then duration will be the amount of time that has passed since the last click of the same button. And that's what I'll use to determine if it's a double click. So I'm going to be calling this function from the main program right after a mouse event has taken place. Right in that loop after the mouse event has taken place, I'm going to come down here, and at some point I'll call this function mouse clicks, because I want to know if a left click has been pushed, for example. So the first thing I want to do in this part of the function is to, I started an if and I need an end if mouse button, so that's whatever I tell it. So if I'm calling it for the left button, I'll give it a value of 1. So it'll say if button 1 is being pushed, then we keep going into this part of the code. So we're going to capture our button down position. So where is the mouse right now that we're pushing down on the button for the first time? So I'm going to calculate a local variable that I didn't dim yet. Not that I have to dim it, but it's nice to dim it. So call X and row Y. So that's the position that it's in when it was pushed down at the top of this function. Okay, so now that I know where it is right now, I need to wait until you release the button. Because remember, like we demonstrated with the Explorer, if you push down and then move the mouse and let go, it doesn't count as a click because you moved it. You're no longer on the same character. So we're going to wait for the button up with a little tiny do loop that's got a limit of 1,000, like we talked about in part 1, that saves CPU cycles. And then mouse input is actually a function that returns a value. So you can't just call it. You've got to assign it to a variable. So I just set m equals mouse input just to make it run. And then I loop while our mouse button is still being pushed for the same button that we're looking at here. So for as long as you're holding that button down, this little loop is just going to keep on running. As soon as you let go of the button, now I need to capture some different information. Now that you've let go of it, I need to know where is your position now. Has it moved? Is it still on the same character, or has it been dragged across the screen? So I calculate our shared variables that the main program can use. Back here, I dimensioned them shared. Right there. So I calculate those the same ways with the integer mouse x divided by 8 plus 1, like we did in part 1. So now I've got a before, or rather a down push, and an release. Two different positions. And now I need to see if they're the same. So we'll determine whether or not a single click has occurred. So if our releasing position x is the same as our push down x, and our releasing y is the same as our push down y, that means it's within the same character. It might have moved a little bit. It might have moved 4 or 5 pixels, because you're clicking it twice or once. You might accidentally move it while you're holding it. But as long as you're still within that same character area, then it'll be considered the same click. So if that's true, if you're in the same character, then I'll say clicks equals 1. That's a single click has occurred. For now, let's see if the single click will work. One more little thing I have to do first, though. Actually, I don't have to do it. We can test it like it is. Let's see. We have to return our value, though, from the function. So the function name is mouse clicks. So let oops. That's why I like to copy paste. So mouse clicks equals clicks. So I didn't actually say clicks equals 0 because it's a dynamic variable, which means that every time it runs this function, it's going to start off with 0 anyways. So if the button's not even being pushed, we're just going to fall right through and we return a 0. If the button is being pushed, but they moved it while they're holding it, then we're going to still return a 0. If they push the button and they hold it and let go of it still on the same character, then we should be returning a 1. And we also should be returning the position of where it is. So let's test this part. And we're going to do that like this. Let's see, up here after our main loop, I'm going to leave all of this prior code that we were using for the right click where it can drag across, because that's different. That's a different kind of click. So I'm going to leave that down there just as it is. And then up here, here's our new part to test the clicking. So I'm going to do it in 2 steps. Instead of saying if mouse clicks 1, then do something, I want to be able to capture that value once and then test it more than once down through here. So I'm going to do it in 2 steps. First, I'm going to make a variable called left mouse, and it's going to be assigned the result of mouse clicks 1. So that's looking for a left button. If the result of that function is a 1, that means that a single click has occurred. So I'll locate to whatever the location is that the function determined, because remember, it can update the shared variables out here in the main module. I'll locate there, and I will print a plus sign. And if. And then I'll continue on doing everything else we were doing before. So at this point, a valid click should result in a plus being put on the screen. Let's see what happens. Okay. So this looks like it did before. So I'm going to right click like we did before just to make sure that the old part still works. And yes, I can still drag across and draw my squares. So now the new thing is, if I were to go up in here, so now you can see the mouse is on this particular square, I'm going to hold down the left button and just hold it down. Okay, so nothing happens. Now I'm dragging across, and I'm going to let go over here. Nothing happens. So it did not take that as a click. Now I'm going to push down and let up. Oh, okay. So it took that as a click. So down and up on the same square, no matter how slow or fast I do it. So that was a very fast one. Or if I go down and wait 3 seconds and then go up, it takes it. But it doesn't do it until the up, if you notice. So it's kind of like what I showed with the OK button and the cancel button. You can sort of change your mind. So if you push down and go, wait, no, I don't want it there, just move away and let go. Nothing happens. And if you move a little bit to the right and let go, nothing happens. Okay? Alright, so that works. So now let's work on the double click part. Because right now, it really doesn't know the difference. It's everything I do is a single click, even if I hit it twice, like that. Notice too that my buttons up here is not changing. I'm hitting the left button, but nothing's changing to -1. That's because that part of the loop is no longer seeing the mouse buttons, because the function is processing them before we get down to the part where it prints them. This one still does when I hold the right button. See up there, it changed to -1. That's because that's the old code that's still out in the main loop. Alright, so let's see if we can do double click now. Just got to add a little more code to my function. So let's see. Determine of single click. So right after that is where we need to start looking at the double click. It's got to be a little more complicated. So let's see if. Okay, here's what we need to do for double click. To start with. Alright, determine if double click. So I'm going to use that up timer variable, which is a dynamic variable that's only going to be used for this one call. Up timer equals timer. So that captures our timer as of right now, and right now is just after the button has been let go of. And the timer is the number of seconds since midnight down to the hundredths of seconds. Well, if you ever think about this, what happens at 11:59:59 when it's almost midnight? Well, the timer value is going to be a really high number. And then what happens at midnight and 1 second after midnight? Well, it's going to start counting over at 0. So it's a very rare chance, but what happens if somebody clicks the mouse down at 11:59:59 and almost midnight, and then they let go of it a half a second later, and it's now 0.2 seconds after midnight. If I try to subtract the difference to find out how long they held that button down, it's going to look like they held it down for a day, because the time up is going to be a whole day less than the time down. So the way we work around that is you can say if the up timer is less than our click timer, and I didn't talk about this yet, but click timer is going to represent the time that the mouse was pushed, the same button was pushed the prior time through the loop, or through the prior function call. So if it's less than that starting timer, then obviously we must have gone past midnight, because time can't go backwards. Therefore, I'll take my up timer and we'll add 86,400 seconds to it, because that's the number of seconds in a 24-hour day. So 60 seconds times 60 minutes is 3,600. 3,600 seconds times 24 hours would get you this number. As rare as that is, it doesn't hurt to put it in just to make sure. And then I'm going to calculate another variable called duration, which will represent the amount of time that has gone by since the first click compared to the second click. So the duration is the up timer minus the click timer. How long since the previous click. Okay, so now the next thing I need to do is do some comparisons. And that will look like this with an if statement. So if our duration is less than 0.5, so less than half a second, and our clicks equals 1. So I'm relying upon the code that I already did up here to determine if it's a valid single click. So we already know, just by saying clicks equals 1, we know that a down click has happened and an up click has happened on the same character. So we already have that part figured out. And if the last button that was used from a prior function was the same as this button, and if our current column X is the same as where it was the last time the function was called, and our current row is the same as where it was the last time we called this function. So all these conditions have to be true in order for this part to set clicks to equal 2, meaning that this is a double click. Now what I'm going to do here is say last button, which is one of my static variables that's going to stay the same from function call to function call. Last button equals 0 if we're detecting a double click, because that's going to prevent a triple click. What would happen if I'm on the main screen and I go click, click, click? Well, the first time I click it, it's going to come in as a single click. And then the second time I do it, assuming it's less than a half a second later, it would come in as a 2 and say this is a double click. And then if I hit it a third time, still within a half a second from the second time, this would come through and say, yep, that's another double click. So I'd end up with 2 double clicks detected. So by setting last button to 0, the next time this comes through and detects the third click, this whole condition won't be completely true. The duration might be true, the clicks might be still 1, the column X and row Y might still be the same, but last button will not be the same because I had set it to 0 the prior time. So that's how I prevent the triple clicks. Otherwise, last button equals button. So if we came through here and it was a single click, but not a double click, then I'll go ahead and say last button equals this button, so that the next time I come through here, I could detect a double click. So this should be all we need to do in order to detect a double click. So let's put in some code to actually look for a double click. So I'm just going to paste in, a second part up here. And now you'll understand why I wanted to do this as a separate call up here, giving it to a variable called left mouse. Because I need to test that variable twice. If it equals 1, we do the single click to place a plus sign. Well, if left mouse equals 2, then that means we've had a double click occur. So I'm just going to locate to the same row and column that was determined by the function. And I'm going to place a blank instead of a plus sign. So it's going to be like an erase. Not that that makes sense to have a double click represent erase, but I'm just for the sake of testing how it works. So let's see what this does for us. I see that OBS does not always update the screen properly. It flashed and then it goes black for a second or two. I don't know why it does that. My monitor that I'm watching is fine. So we still have our movement. We still have our dragging boxes getting printed, displayed. And let's see if we still have our single click. Okay, so we have plus signs. And still, if I click once and drag it over and let go, we get nothing. So it has to be the same square clicked. So let's try a double click. So I'm going to go down here and go, ooh. Okay, it didn't work. So anytime I try to double click, I'm getting another plus sign instead. Alright, I have to figure out what went wrong. Let's see, so main loop there. Okay, let's look at our function. So double click is going to occur if our up timer is less than our click timer. Wait, down here, if duration less than 5, yep, and clicks equals 1, last button equals button, call X equals last call X. Oh, okay. So I'm relying upon the fact that I'm going to store the ending column X and row Y values into a last col X and last row Y value so that I can test them in the next time the functions run. But I forgot to paste them in. So it never knew that it had just clicked on these same places the last time through. So all I have to do is add a couple of things in here. So before the end of this outer if, because all of this stuff only takes place if the mouse button that we're looking for is pushed. So if I'm not pushing the button and we call this function, it's just going to say, is this button pushed? Nope. So it's going to jump right down here and say clicks equals 0. So if the button is pushed at all, regardless of whether or not there is a single click or a double click, I'm still going to do this part here just to save this information for the next time so that I can compare. So we're going to say click timer equals timer. So this will capture the time of the releasing of this button. And that's what I will compare to the next time to see if it's only been a half a second later. And then our last col X will become our mouse col X, and last row will be the last row. That way I can compare that next time as well. I should probably put some lets in here just to make it more complete. Okay, that was a little on-the-spot troubleshooting. Now let's see if this makes it better. Okay, there we go. Movement's working. Here's our squares. I don't know why I always do a rectangle in the center. I suppose I could do a diagonal. So let's try a click. Still works with the plus sign, but doesn't work if I drag across. I'll have to click in the same square. All right, let's try a double click because that should do a blank. Okay, so that worked. Notice how it prints a plus first, because it doesn't know it's a double click until you've hit it the second time. So once you've hit it the first time, for all it knows, that's all you're going to do. So it's going to say, okay, that's a single click. But you hit it the second time within a half a second, and now that takes it as a blank. So let's see if I do a really slow double click. So click, click. Oh, that was still a half a second. Click, click. Nope, that wasn't. Click, click. And what happens if I double click one place, or click one place and then click the other place really fast? Will it take that as a double click? No, it took it as two singles because the characters changed. It wasn't the same position. So in order for it to be a double click, it's got to be the same character clicked within a half a second. Okay, this is pretty much what I wanted to accomplish. One thing I have spent a lot of time trying to get done, trying to figure out how to do, is to combine the two. So I've got the left button as single clicks and double clicks, and I've got the right button being used where it can just drag across. So the right button works the opposite way. As soon as I touch it, it just puts a square there immediately. It doesn't wait for me to let go, and that's why I'm able to do this. What if I wanted double right click to do something different? Well, that would be very difficult to do, because as soon as I hit it once, this part of the loop is going to take over and just start dragging it around. I won't be able to detect that it's been hit a second time. At least I won't be able to do it in the same function. In fact, I don't think I could do it in any function. I almost think I've got to build it into the main loop. So I'm not sure if I'm going to spend time working on that or not, because I don't know if that's going to come up in real life, where I'm going to want to mix the two modes of operation. So in any event, this is what I wanted to accomplish for this video, part 2. We now have the ability to click, to select, and to detect a single click and a double click the same way that Windows does. And by the way, I could change that timer too. I could make it be only a third of a second or a quarter of a second, which means you'd have to be really quick in order for it to be a double. Or I could make it be a whole second or even longer if I wanted to be able to go click and then click. But the problem there is, suppose you're clicking something multiple times because you want to do single clicks. You don't want the second one to be considered a double click. So it seems that about a half second is a good time. So with that, I think I'm going to end this video. So we now have a nice big function called mouse clicks, where I can test any button I want. And that wasn't too bad. I mean, it's kind of complicated, but it's not too bad when you walk through it in pieces, I think. So that'll do it for this time.